Hi guys, Miss Francis here to continue our discussion on Mendelian genetics. Here are our two vocabulary words for today: incomplete dominance and codominance. So before we jump into incomplete dominance and codominance, I want to remind you that Mendel had no knowledge of genes, of DNA, of chromosomes. So then why did his experiments work? Well, he used a very large sample size. He was a monk, so he had a lot of patience to wait for these plethora of peas to grow and for him to research them. He also had a good understanding of chance. Mendel was a mathematician, so he was able to apply statistics to his experiment. Furthermore, each characteristic was controlled by a single gene, where that gene only had two alleles. It only had two versions, one of which was completely dominant over the other. So for example, for flower color, purple was completely dominant over white. For seed color, yellow was completely dominant over green. So Mendel never knew about incomplete dominance or codominance. So then what is incomplete dominance? Incomplete dominance is where one allele doesn't overpower another. In other words, there are no recessive alleles, and the offspring combine to produce a third phenotype that's a blended effect of the appearance. So let me give you some examples. You've got red and white snapdragons that produce pink snapdragons. Similarly, Japanese 4 o'clock flowers or red and white parents produce pink offspring. Andalusian fowls are black feathered chickens that when they mate with their white feathered chickens, it makes kind of like a blue colored, bluish gray colored. Let me show you some pictures. So you see you've got the snapdragons here, where if I cross red with white, I'm going to get pink. Here's your Japanese 4 o'clock flowers. If you cross red with white, you get pink. And lastly, the Andalusian fowl, where if I cross black with white, I kind of get this like bluish, grayish color. So there's a blended effect. I create this third phenotype. How do you represent? Oh, okay. So do you see how there are different, or there is different nomenclature to represent these alleles? Let me show you the overall, or the three different types of nomenclature that can be used to represent these alleles. So because both of them are dominant, you can't use a capital and a lowercase letter. So the nomenclature that we're going to be using is this first one, where the dominant would be capital letter, capital letter. The other dominant would be capital with a little asterisk, capital with a little asterisk, and then the offspring would be the capital letter with just one asterisk. In your textbook, you have this nomenclature, and in Sal Khan's video, or Khan Academy, he uses that nomenclature. Sal Khan's nomenclature is really not as acceptable, but it still works, and you may see any of those three types of nomenclature used to represent incomplete dominance. So if you were to do a sample Punnett square using pink snapdragon flowers or any organism that exhibits incomplete dominance, you'd always get a 1:2:1 ratio regarding the phenotype and the genotype. So I'd have one white, one red, or one white, two pink, one red, one homozygous dominant red, two homozygous dominant pink, one homozygous dominant white. And here is what that would look like in your textbook. So now let's get into codominance. Codominance is when both alleles show up simultaneously to produce a third phenotype. And there are two classic examples: blood type. So people who have blood type AB have both the alleles and molecules present for A-type blood and B-type blood. This plays a critical role during blood transfusions or pregnancy. Actually, we're going to discuss something called an Rh factor, and I'll give you some more details later on, because blood type also falls under another inheritance pattern called multiple alleles. The second classic example is roan cows. So roan cows will express both red and white hairs simultaneously. So they're expressing both of those alleles at the same time. And this is what that would look like, where I have a red cow that has all red hairs, a white cow with all white hairs, and now I have a roan cow where both red and white alleles are expressed together. So how do you tell the difference between incomplete dominance and codominance? Well, with incomplete dominance, I get this kind of like blended effect. I get that third phenotype that gives me a blended effect in the offspring of the parents. Whereas in codominance, I express both of the parents' alleles. So for example, if my parent had red and white alleles, in codominance, I'm expressing both of those red and white alleles. Last thing before I end this video, and prepare to have your minds blown, because there's actually a dominant trait that's not common at all. Did you know that having 5 fingers is actually a recessive trait? Polydactyly is where an individual is born with extra fingers or extra toes. That's a dominant trait. But because people with 5 fingers can only pass on the recessive trait of having that 5 fingers, most of the population has 5 fingers. Next video, we'll talk about multiple alleles and blood types.